Hey, it's 6.2, Step 2, Sample Paper 1 by JS. This is the video that you should be watching after you have read both texts, Text 1 and Text 2, and both essays by JS. So the learning target is students will be able to read exemplars of Paper 1 essays and explain why they are successful. Now that you have read a couple of essays and seen some comments from the examiners, I want to talk about these essays and why they work. So the question is, what scores does the essay, or maybe do the essays by JS deserve? All right, so did you mark the text? Did you mark it up, the actual essays that she wrote, and find the central assertion and references to the guiding question? I called it the prompt in there. Sorry about that. Well, if you did, you should have some things underlined or in yellow highlight. That's the central assertion. Wavy underline or pink are authorial choices of any kind. And a star or blue is language from the prompt or the guiding question. Using language from the guiding question throughout your essay is really essential to staying focused and having a well-organized essay. So that is a helpful tip and something to look at in these sample essays. Green is literary devices. What's different between literary devices and authorial choices? Well, here's what I was thinking. An authorial choice is anything that the author has chosen. A named literary device is a specific literary device like simile, metaphor, and authorial choice is a little bit more general. That's kind of what I was thinking, but maybe I didn't need to have them both on there now that I've gone through this once. And then I wanted you to count how many direct quotes are used in each literary analysis. Okay, now before we talk about what you came up with, what you found in JS's first essay, I did want to talk a bit about what the subject report said about these texts. The subject report is the report that the examiners create every year after the exam and send to all of the teachers. And then we, teachers, read them and use them as we teach you guys. So I want to show you kind of straight from the mouths of the examiners what they're looking for, what they saw worked well in student essays, and what they saw needed work. So one thing that they said was that most candidates seemed to grasp that this text was a first-person account. And when I'm saying this text, I'm talking about text 1. And so that's the excerpt from Prospero's Cell by Lawrence Durrell. Okay? And some noticed that it was arranged in the form of diary or journal entries. The majority at least attempted to focus on descriptive language, and a small number managed to comment effectively on the contrasts, for example, between peaceful seclusion and noisy confusion. The majority of candidates also managed to organize their response in a logical fashion. So those were things that worked well, the examiners are saying. The literary form seemed to confuse some candidates. So form is another word for genre, so the type of writing that this is. A significant number refer to it often repeatedly as a story. And it's not. We're told right in the very first sentence from the IB test, this is an extract from Prospero's Cell, a non-fiction work by Lawrence Durrell. So don't call it a story if it's non-fiction, right? Those silly examiners that call it a story. We wouldn't do that. And several missed the journal diary format. Some used inappropriate and anachronistic terminology, referring to it, for example, as an example of magical realism. It's not. The second part of the guiding question, the subject report says, was either ignored or glossed over by many candidates. And that was the part about atmosphere. So this is the problem here. People said things like descriptive language creates atmosphere, but they didn't say what the atmosphere actually is, or never mentioned it again. Even when candidates did attempt to explore this, they tended to see it as unchanging. Very few attempted to explore how the atmosphere varies throughout the text. And when we're looking at patterns, that's a key thing, right? Looking at how the pattern changes. So how does the atmosphere change? Specific details cause problems for some candidates. Many discuss the image of the crew sleeping like a litter of cats, but very few noticed this was a scene imagined by the author, and nearly all candidates ignored the reference to metamorphic stone entirely. So those were a couple of key spots they thought we should tackle. Several candidates wrote rather dismissively about the lack of civilization on the island, and at least one candidate asserted that Greece was and is a third world country. So they don't want you to talk about that context stuff. They want you to stay focused on what's in the extract. Here was JS's central assertion. So the guiding question, how does the author use descriptive language to create an atmosphere? Look at how many times she uses language from the guiding question in her central assertion. Durrell is able to create an atmosphere of isolation and loneliness through the use of the details given involving seclusion. Furthermore, a barren atmosphere is illustrated due to the descriptive language at the low temperature. However, Durrell's hints to plant life and specific descriptive language on the growth of plants and branches combat the negative connotation of the barren and lonely atmosphere already created. So you can see that she's done a lot of the things that the subject report commented on students not doing, and so it's a good example. She has talked about changing atmospheres. She's been specific about the kind of atmospheres and explaining how the details create that atmosphere. So let's take a look at what the IB gave her for scores. Each paper is assessed on the 4 criteria, A, B, C, and D. For an A, a student needs to, in order to score a 5, which is nearly impossible, thanks, IB, the response demonstrates a thorough and perceptive understanding of the literal meaning of the text. There is a convincing and insightful interpretation of larger implications and subtleties of the text. References to the text are well chosen and effectively support the candidate's ideas. A 4, the response demonstrates a thorough understanding of the literal meaning. There is a convincing interpretation of many implications of the text. References are relevant and support the candidate's ideas. So here are a couple of things I wanted to comment on about her interpretation. She explains what types of descriptive language the author uses with specific descriptors. She says details involving seclusion, descriptive language at a low temperature, descriptive language on the growth of plants. So she doesn't just say description creates atmosphere. She says what kind of description creates what kind or type of atmosphere. She says the atmosphere of isolation and loneliness, a barren atmosphere, and then also that there's something more positive too, right? There's some details that combat the negative connotation of the barren and lonely atmosphere. And so the second part of this criterion is the references. She uses 22 different direct quotations to make her point. The quotes are always short. You notice how oftentimes they're just one word and integrated into her own sentences. She doesn't repeat quotes often either. She uses them from all over the extract, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So here's what they gave her. They gave her a 4. What did you give her? She got 4 out of 5. All right, for criterion B, this is analysis and evaluation. In order to score higher than a 3, which is the response demonstrates a generally appropriate analysis of textual features and authorial choices, we have to have at times insightful analysis, good evaluation of how such features and or choices shape meaning is cut off there, excellent analysis and appreciation of the ways in which language, structure, technique, and style shape meaning. Here is what the assessors gave her. They gave her a 3 for that one. Okay, C, this is presentation, organization, and development. How well organized, coherent, and developed is the presentation? The examiners gave her a 4. Well organized, mostly coherent, adequately focused. And finally, for criterion D, use of language, did you notice some of the words are squiggly underlined? That was when the examiner noticed a misspelling or a misused word. And the examiner doesn't note every one of them, but, there are a few noted. And so probably won't get a 5, right? But it does get a 4. She knew what atmosphere meant, for example, that it is the feeling created mostly through the description of setting to create a mood for the reader. And just being able to correctly identify that term shows a pretty sophisticated use of language. All right, how about the second text? The second text is the poem Easter Monday in Memoriam E.T. The subject report said the majority of candidates seemed to grasp the broad situation and to recognize that the poem focused on letters exchanged between two close friends, one of whom had died in battle. Several candidates recognized that whilst imagery is a key aspect, other features are equally relevant. I would say while, not whilst, by the way. This is where we can tell that they're from Wales. The best of these adopted a focus which combined imagery and repetition of imagery and structure. Whilst the second part of the guiding question was often ignored in prose responses, many candidates commented effectively and sensitively on the tone or mood of the poem and how it relates. So when the guiding question is about imagery and you notice something about structure, what should you do? You can combine them. Subject report says so right here. That's a helpful tip, right? That's good stuff. Interpretation, too, was often rather better in responses to the poem than to the prose. Several candidates made fairly convincing links between Farjean's gardens, apples, and even Eve and the Garden of Eden. And some argued equally convincingly that the natural imagery of sowing, growth, and ripeness was indicative of the sexual tension between Farjean and Thomas. Interesting interpretations. Many candidates continue to struggle to pin down imagery with sufficient precision. In many cases, specific images were noted, but analysis did not go much beyond the assertion that these create a picture in the reader's head. Hey, guess what? That's the definition of imagery. So saying that is totally meaningless. You've just defined what the term means, and the examiner already knows what it means. What they want to know is what specific images you found and how those images create thoughts and feelings, and what those thoughts and feelings are, and how those shape meaning, what the meaning is. Some candidates also struggled with the chronology of the events, and a significant number seemed to think that Farjean and Thomas had been together planting the earliest seeds, despite the clear reference to the last letter. Not knowing anything about Easter did not impede understanding. So that was nice to hear them say. They don't want you to deal with context. In fact, maybe an advantage to not know about Easter. Those who did refer to Easter often got bogged down in discussions of resurrection or Easter egg hunts. So again, avoid context, focus on the text instead. A small number of candidates imposed readings on the poem, the most common being that it detailed the stages of grief. So you got to let the poem be what it is, instead of looking for something you've seen in another poem and put it in this poem. If it's not there, it's not there. All right, what did she get on this one? Guess what? They liked this one even more. How is imagery used to convey the poet's feelings is the guiding question. Her central assertion. Through the description of letters, Farjean conveys her feelings of regret due to unfinished business. The illustrations of apples and garden life showcase how, while Farjean's late friend was alive, she felt useful and now useless. The description of time and the passing of it is Farjean's use of imagery to convey her feelings of longing. So on criterion A, interpretation, she explains with precision that the imagery used description of letters, or the type of imagery used. It was letters, apples and garden life, time, and the passing of time. And she labels specific feelings created, like regret due to unfinished business. She felt useful and now useless. Feelings of longing. She had some good support. She had 12 different direct quotations to make her point. They were always short and integrated into her own sentence, and she doesn't repeat them. Instead, they're from all over the extract. She got a 4 on this one, so she got the same as the first one. I guess she got a 4 on the first one, didn't she? But for B, here's where she scored higher. They gave her a 4 for analysis and evaluation. The response demonstrates an appropriate and at times insightful analysis of textual features and or authorial choices. There's a good evaluation of how such features and or choices shape meaning. For presentation, organization, and development, they said a 4 again. And for use of language, there were some errors, but some sophisticated language as well, and so they gave her a 4 once again. So all in all, her paper scored a total of, what was that? 31, I think, out of 40. And so that was the highest score that we got last year. This was it. So read these essays as very good examples of what you want to do. Congrats to Ms. Jordan Sadler. I knew she'd do it. Woo!